He brought his colleague to my law firm's anniversary gala, then walked straight to her table and fastened my grandmother's diamond necklace around his mistress's throat, calling it a family treasure. I stepped to the microphone, smiled at the crowd of 300 lawyers, and announced that while he chose her, I chose justice. Starting with the federal embezzlement charges, the judicial ethics complaint, and the restraining order being served right now. Happy anniversary, darling. I wasn't supposed to be standing at this podium alone tonight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was supposed to be celebrating the 5th anniversary of Henderson and Associates, alongside my husband of 8 years, Douglas Henderson, sharing this triumph with the man who had helped me build this legal empire from nothing. The champagne should have tasted like victory. My firm had just won the city's most prestigious pro bono award, and the culmination of 5 years of relentless work was being recognized by 300 of the most influential legal minds in Manhattan. Instead, the Dom Perignon tasted like betrayal, as I watched my husband of 8 years fasten my great-grandmother's diamond necklace around another woman's throat at table 12. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel buzzed with congratulations and networking conversations, but my world had narrowed to a single devastating image: Celine Porter, my junior associate, wearing the one thing in this world that meant more to me than any legal victory. The Art Deco diamond necklace that had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and 3 generations of Porter women fighting to keep our family legacy intact. Douglas was leaning close to her now, his lips moving in what I could only assume was the same romantic story he'd told me about family heirlooms and generational love. Except this wasn't his family's legacy to give away, it was mine. The necklace had been locked in our home safe, where I'd placed it after my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago, trusting my husband to protect the one physical connection I had left to the women who'd shaped me. 40 minutes earlier, I'd been on top of the world. The New York Legal Foundation had just announced Henderson and Associates as their pro bono firm of the year, recognizing the 2,000 hours of free legal work we'd provided to domestic violence survivors. I'd built this firm from nothing, working 100-hour weeks while Douglas established his political consulting business. Tonight was supposed to be our shared triumph, the moment when all our sacrifices finally paid off in public recognition. I'd given my acceptance speech with genuine pride, thanking the team of dedicated attorneys who'd made our success possible, acknowledging the clients who'd trusted us with their most vulnerable moments, and recognizing the community leaders who'd supported our mission. The applause had been thunderous, the standing ovation lasting nearly 2 minutes as 300 legal professionals honored what we'd accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd concluded that speech. Henderson and Associates proves that success isn't measured only by billable hours or corporate profits. True success comes from using our legal training to change lives, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that justice isn't just available to those who can afford it. The crowd had erupted again, and I'd felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your life's work has meaning beyond personal achievement. This award represented everything I'd dreamed about during those early years when I'd worked weekends to afford law school textbooks. But then Douglas had approached the stage as I was leaving the podium, carrying 2 champagne flutes and wearing the smile that had first attracted me 8 years ago. "To my brilliant wife," he'd said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "who continues to amaze me with her dedication to justice." We'd clinked glasses, and for a moment everything had felt perfect. This was the partnership I'd believed we'd built together: mutual support, shared values, complementary strengths working toward common goals. "I need to check on the Patterson Industries table," he'd whispered in my ear, as we posed for photographers. "Potential expansion of their legal needs. Give me 20 minutes, then we'll celebrate properly." I'd nodded, understanding that business networking never stopped, even during personal celebrations. That's who we were: ambitious, driven, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Douglas's political consulting work often intersected with my legal practice, and cultivating relationships was essential to both our success. I'd watched him walk across the ballroom, stopping to shake hands and accept congratulations, playing the supportive husband perfectly. I'd felt a surge of gratitude for this man who'd stood by me during the lean years, who'd celebrated every victory and helped strategize through every setback. Then I'd seen him approach table 12, where Celine Porter sat with what I'd assumed were the Patterson Industries executives. Celine, my most promising junior associate, who'd been instrumental in winning several high-profile cases this year. Celine, who'd become Douglas's go-to legal researcher whenever his consulting work required legal opinions. From my position at the head table, I'd watched Douglas lean down to speak with the older gentleman beside Celine, clearly the client meeting he'd mentioned. Professional, appropriate, exactly what I'd expected from a man who understood how to cultivate business relationships. What I hadn't expected was to see him reach into his jacket pocket and pull out a familiar navy blue jewelry box. What I hadn't expected was to watch him open it and lift out the diamond necklace that had been my great-grandmother's most precious possession. What I hadn't expected was to see him fasten it around Celine's neck, while she smiled up at him with unmistakable intimacy. The blood had rushed from my head so quickly I'd gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Douglas Henderson, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my business, was giving away my family's most sacred heirloom to another woman. Not just any woman, my employee, my protégé, someone I'd trusted and mentored. 20 minutes later, I would learn that Celine Porter was actually Celine Patterson, wife of federal Judge Arthur Patterson. 20 minutes later, I would discover that my husband and my employee had been systematically embezzling from Judge Patterson's family charitable foundation. 20 minutes later, I would understand that my firm's reputation had been used as a front for federal crimes. But in that moment, watching the diamonds that had sustained 3 generations of Porter women glitter around another woman's throat, I felt only one thing: the same calm determination that had built this firm from nothing, that had won justice for hundreds of clients, that had transformed a girl from Queens into one of New York's most respected attorneys. Tonight, that determination would serve justice one more time. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to destroy my marriage in the same ballroom where Douglas and I had celebrated our first major professional victory 5 years ago. Back then, we'd been scrappy upstarts, me with my newly minted law license and impossible dreams, him with a fledgling political consulting firm and more ambition than clients. That night, we'd toasted to a future we were going to build together, brick by brick, case by case, client by client. Now, surveying the room that held so many of our shared memories, I could see exactly how far we'd both come. Henderson and Associates occupied 4 floors of a Madison Avenue building, with 37 attorneys and a client list that included Fortune 500 companies and A-list celebrities. The firm's pro bono division had saved 17 women's shelters from closure and helped 400 domestic violence survivors secure protective orders and custody agreements. I'd built this empire one case at a time, working 18-hour days while Douglas grew his consulting business into a political powerhouse. We'd been partners in every sense, sharing strategies, celebrating victories, covering each other's weaknesses, or so I'd thought. The Plaza Ballroom tonight showcased everything we'd accomplished together. The guest list read like a who's who of New York legal and political circles, federal judges, district attorneys, Supreme Court clerks, senators, and the kind of white-shoe law firm partners who'd once looked through me like I was invisible. They were all here to honor Henderson and Associates, to celebrate the scrappy little firm that had become impossible to ignore. The award we just received, Pro Bono Firm of the Year, represented the culmination of everything I'd dreamed about during those early years when I'd worked weekends to afford law school textbooks. The New York Legal Foundation didn't hand out recognition lightly. This award meant we'd not only succeeded financially, but had used that success to change lives. Standing at this podium, I could see faces that told the story of our rise. There was District Attorney Mary Ann Small, who'd given us our first major referral when no one else would take a chance on a 2-person firm. Judge Liam Porter, who'd ruled in our favor in the landmark custody case that had made our reputation. City Councilwoman Donna Patterson, who'd hired us to draft the domestic violence legislation that had become a model for other cities. These people had watched me transform from an uncertain associate into a legal force. They'd seen Douglas and me as the golden couple of New York professional circles, young, driven, unstoppable together. Many of them had invested in our success, referred clients. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. opened doors that might have remained closed to a working-class girl from Queens who'd paid for law school with restaurant tips and student loans. The champagne reception had been flowing for 2 hours before my acceptance speech, giving me time to work the room, accept congratulations, and bask in recognition that had seemed impossible when I'd first hung out my shingle 5 years ago. Partners from competing firms had approached me with genuine respect, discussing potential collaborations and expressing admiration for what we'd built. "Amelia, this is your moment," Senator Lionel Henderson, no relation to Douglas, despite the shared surname, had told me during the cocktail hour. "You've proven that success isn't about who you know or where you went to school, it's about results." He was right. The firm's track record spoke for itself: an 87% success rate in family court, $50 million recovered for clients in personal injury cases, and 0 ethical violations in 5 years of practice. We'd built our reputation on meticulous preparation, aggressive advocacy, and absolute integrity. That integrity was what had attracted clients like Patterson Industries, the construction conglomerate owned by Judge Arthur Patterson's family. They'd hired us 6 months ago to handle a complex environmental lawsuit, trusting Henderson and Associates with their reputation and their family legacy. The partnership had been Celine's idea. She'd identified the business opportunity and cultivated the relationship with characteristic thoroughness. Celine Porter had joined the firm 18 months ago, fresh from Columbia Law with stellar recommendations and an impressive judicial clerkship under her belt. I'd hired her personally, seeing something of myself in her hunger and determination. She'd quickly become indispensable, working the same brutal hours I'd once worked, staying late to master complex regulations, volunteering for the most challenging cases. I'd mentored her carefully, sharing strategies I'd learned through trial and error, introducing her to key contacts, giving her opportunities to shine in court. When Douglas had needed legal research for his political consulting work, I'd recommended Celine without hesitation. She was brilliant, thorough, and trustworthy, exactly the kind of attorney I'd want representing Henderson and Associates in any context. Or so I'd believed until 40 minutes ago, when I'd watched my husband fasten my great-grandmother's necklace around her throat, like she was his beloved wife instead of his co-conspirator. The champagne that should have been celebrating our firm's greatest triumph now tasted like the bitter acknowledgement that everything I'd believed about my marriage, my business partner, and my most trusted employee had been built on lies. But as I stood in this ballroom, surrounded by the legal community that had watched my rise from nobody to somebody, I felt something stronger than betrayal or hurt. I felt the same cold determination that had carried me through law school while working 3 jobs. The same strategic thinking that had won impossible cases against better-funded opponents. The same relentless pursuit of justice that had built Henderson and Associates into a force that couldn't be ignored. The microphone felt familiar in my hands as I prepared to address the crowd that had gathered to celebrate our success. They had no idea they were about to witness the most important closing argument of my career, not in a courtroom, but in the ballroom where I'd first learned to believe in the power of my own voice. Tonight, that voice would serve justice one more time. The text message had arrived during the appetizer course, just as I was explaining to Judge Patterson's business associate about our new victim advocacy program. My phone had buzzed against the table, and I'd glanced down expecting to see congratulations from a client or colleague who couldn't attend tonight's gala. Instead, I'd found a message from Douglas that made my blood run cold. Handling Patterson Industries' crisis consultation with Celine. Business can't wait for celebrations. We'll catch up with you later. Proud of your award. I'd stared at that message for a full 30 seconds, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. Patterson Industries' crisis consultation. I was the lead attorney on their account. If there was a crisis, I should have been the first to know. And why would Douglas be handling a legal consultation for my client? His political consulting had nothing to do with environmental litigation, but it was the casual mention of Celine that had sent warning bells through my mind. When had my junior associate become Douglas's primary legal counsel? And why was he conducting firm business during what should have been our celebration? I'd immediately opened my laptop, discreetly checking my email for any urgent communications from Patterson Industries. Nothing. No after-hours emergencies, no crisis communications, no urgent legal matters requiring immediate attention. The environmental lawsuit was proceeding smoothly, with depositions scheduled for next month and settlement discussions progressing favorably. So what crisis consultation was Douglas referring to? I'd excused myself from the head table, claiming I needed to take an important call, and made my way to the hotel's business center. A quick check of the firm's case management system confirmed what I'd already suspected: there was no Patterson Industries emergency. All their matters were current, all deadlines met, all communications routine. That's when I'd noticed something that made my stomach drop. Celine had been accessing Patterson Industries files extensively over the past 3 weeks. Not just the environmental case files, but the corporate structure documents, financial statements, and trust fund management records. Files she had no legitimate reason to review. I'd pulled up the access logs, my hands trembling slightly as I traced her digital footprint through confidential client information. Late-night logins, weekend file downloads, systematic review of documents related to the Patterson family's charitable foundation and elderly family members' estate planning. The pattern was unmistakable: someone was conducting due diligence on our client's financial assets. The business center's phone had rung at that moment, startling me from my investigation. "Mrs. Henderson," the concierge's voice was apologetic. "There's a gentleman here asking for you, says it's regarding the Patterson matter you're handling." "Send him up," I'd said automatically, assuming it was someone from the family with questions about the litigation. But when the elevator doors opened, I'd found myself face to face with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, distinguished, with the kind of silver hair that suggested years of important decisions. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Detective Lionel Small with the NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force," he'd said, showing his badge. "I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but we need to discuss some irregularities involving Patterson Industries and your firm." My legal training had kicked in immediately. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized transfers from their charitable foundation, 3 separate withdrawals totaling $200,000 over the past 6 weeks. The family's accountant flagged them this afternoon when preparing quarterly reports. Detective Small had pulled out a folder. The transfers were authorized using digital signatures that trace back to legal opinions allegedly prepared by Henderson and Associates. I'd felt the floor shift beneath me. "That's impossible. I personally review all legal opinions involving client financing." According to our preliminary investigation, these opinions were prepared by Associate Celine Patterson. "Is she authorized to handle trust fund matters independently?" "Patterson?" I'd repeated, my mind racing. "Her name is Celine Porter, and she's not authorized for independent trust work. She's only been with the firm 18 months. Detective Small had frowned, consulting his notes. "Our records show Celine Patterson, married to federal Judge Arthur Patterson. She's listed as secondary counsel on the Patterson Industries account." The world had tilted on its axis. Celine Porter was Celine Patterson. My junior associate was married to one of the most powerful federal judges in New York. She'd been using a maiden name at the firm, concealing her connection to our biggest client. And apparently, she'd been using that hidden connection to steal from her own family's charitable foundation. "Detective, I need to see those transfer authorizations immediately." He'd handed me copies of the documents, and my worst fears had been confirmed. The legal opinions bore my firm's letterhead and what appeared to be my digital signature, but I'd never seen them before. They authorized the charitable foundation to make emergency distributions to support urgent legal defense funds, language that was both vague enough to avoid immediate scrutiny and specific enough to justify large transfers. "Mrs. Henderson, we also need to discuss your husband's involvement." My husband, Douglas Henderson. His consulting firm received $75,000 of the transferred funds, designated as crisis communication consulting for the Patterson family. When we attempted to verify this consulting arrangement, we discovered that Patterson Industries has no crisis communication contract with your husband's firm. I'd sunk into the business center's chair, the full scope of the betrayal becoming clear. Celine hadn't just been stealing from her family's foundation, she'd been funneling money to Douglas, using fake legal opinions to justify the transfers. My husband and my employee had been conducting systematic financial fraud using my firm's reputation and my forged signature. "Detective Small, I need you to understand something." I had no knowledge of these transactions. If my signature appears on those documents, it's been forged. We suspected as much given your firm's reputation, but Mrs. Henderson, there's something else. We've been investigating this for 3 weeks, and tonight was supposed to be a surveillance operation. We expected Celine Patterson to attempt additional transfers during the gala, when attention would be focused elsewhere. The gala. They'd planned to steal more money during my firm's celebration, using the evening's festivities as cover for additional fraud. The audacity was breathtaking, conducting financial crimes during an event honoring legal ethics and pro bono service. What do you need from me? I'd asked, my voice steadier than I'd felt. Right now, we need you to return to that ballroom and act normally. We have surveillance teams positioned throughout the hotel, and we believe they're about to make another transfer attempt tonight. I'd nodded, understanding. You want to catch them in the act? Exactly. Can you do that, Mrs. Henderson? Can you go back in there and pretend you don't know what they've been doing? I'd straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar calm that always preceded my most important court battles. Detective, I've been preparing for this closing argument my entire career. Walking back into that ballroom felt like entering enemy territory. Every smile seemed calculated, every congratulation potentially hollow, every familiar face now suspect. Detective Small's revelation had transformed my celebration into a crime scene, and I was both victim and star witness in a performance that could determine whether justice was served or my life's work was destroyed. The first thing I noticed was that Douglas was no longer at table 12. A quick scan of the room revealed him near the bar, animated in conversation with City Councilwoman Donna Patterson, another member of the Patterson family. I now realized how many of them were involved. How deep did this conspiracy go? I forced myself to smile and accept congratulations as I made my way toward my original seat, every step calculated to appear normal while my mind raced through implications. If Celine had been using her married name to access family trust funds, and if Douglas had been receiving payments through his consulting firm, how long had this been planned? When had my marriage become a business arrangement designed to exploit my professional reputation? Amelia, Senator Henderson intercepted me near the head table, his enthusiasm genuine but now feeling like another layer of deception I had to navigate. Brilliant speech earlier. The way you connected legal advocacy to social justice, that's the kind of message that wins hearts and minds. Thank you, Senator, I replied automatically. My attention split between maintaining appearances and observing the room. The work speaks for itself. Indeed it does. Your firm's success proves that integrity and results go hand in hand. His words stung with irony, given what I now knew about my own firm being used as a front for financial fraud. I hope you and Douglas will consider supporting my re-election campaign. We need more couples like you two in positions of influence. Couples like us. If only he knew that us was apparently a carefully constructed lie designed to facilitate embezzlement. I nodded non-committally, excusing myself to check on other guests while keeping Douglas in my peripheral vision. At the bar, Douglas was now joined by Celine, their body language intimate in a way that had nothing to do with professional consultation. She was touching his arm while he spoke, leaning close to hear him over the ambient noise. The diamond necklace caught the light every time she moved, my great-grandmother's legacy glittering against her throat like a trophy. I approached the bar from the opposite end, positioning myself where I could overhear fragments of their conversation while appearing to order another drink. The bartender recognized me immediately, another advantage of hosting the event at a venue where I was known. The usual champagne, Mrs. Henderson, he asked loudly enough to announce my presence. Douglas's head snapped toward me, his expression shifting through surprise, guilt, and finally settling on his practiced political smile. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, approaching with arms extended for an embrace. "I was just telling Celine about tomorrow's honeymoon planning." Honeymoon planning. Another lie, delivered so smoothly that I almost admired his audacity. Celine's smile was perfectly crafted, warm but professional, congratulatory but respectful. If I hadn't seen Detective Small's evidence, I might have believed this was exactly what it appeared to be: my husband discussing travel plans with a colleague. "How thoughtful of you to include Celine in our personal planning," I said, accepting the champagne and raising it in a toast. to partnerships built on trust and transparency. The irony was lost on neither of them, though they recovered quickly. Douglas clinked his glass against mine with theatrical enthusiasm. To the most successful woman I know, and to many more years of building something extraordinary together. Many more years, I agreed, meeting his eyes directly, assuming we can maintain the foundation of honesty that makes partnership possible. Celine shifted uncomfortably, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the necklace. I should probably return to Judge Patterson, she said. He's been alone at our table too long. Our table. She was openly acknowledging her marriage to the federal judge, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of being single. How many other lies had she told during her 18 months at my firm? Of course, I said graciously. Please give Arthur my regards. We should schedule lunch soon to discuss the environmental case progression. Actually, Douglas interjected quickly, Celine and I were just discussing some complications with that matter. Nothing urgent, but we may need to adjust our strategy. There it was. The cover story for their private conversations, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd practiced this deception. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering legal strategy rather than recognizing manipulation. What kind of complications? I asked, genuinely curious how they would elaborate on their fictional crisis. Douglas and Celine exchanged a glance, brief but loaded with meaning. Discovery issues, Celine said finally. Some of the family's financial documents may need additional review before we can proceed with depositions. Financial documents? Of course, they were setting up justification for accessing more Patterson family records, creating a legal pretext for the very information they'd been stealing. The audacity was breathtaking, using my own firm's reputation to legitimize their criminal activity. I see, I said slowly. And this requires immediate attention. Tonight, unfortunately, yes, Douglas replied smoothly. The opposing counsel has raised some procedural challenges that could delay the entire case if we don't address them promptly. Another lie, easily verifiable but delivered with such conviction that I almost doubted my own knowledge of the case status. This was how they'd operated for months, creating urgency around fictional problems, using that manufactured crisis to justify unusual requests and access to sensitive information. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a communication from Detective Small. Ready when you are. Teams in position. I looked up to find both Douglas and Celine watching me expectantly, as if my response to their fictional legal crisis would determine their next move. They had no idea that their next move was already being observed by federal investigators who'd been tracking their activities for weeks. You know what? I said, raising my champagne glass again. I think we should address these complications publicly. After all, transparency builds trust, and trust is the foundation of every successful partnership. The color drained from both their faces as they realized I was no longer playing their game. Before I could understand the full weight of what Douglas and Celine had stolen from me, I needed to remember what we'd once been mine, or what I'd believed we were. 8 years ago, when Douglas Henderson first asked me to dinner after that charity auction, I'd thought I was the luckiest woman in New York. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of shared ambitions and complementary strengths. Douglas was building his political consulting firm from scratch, just as I was grinding through my associate years at Morrison & Klein. We'd spend evenings in my tiny studio apartment, him crafting campaign strategies while I prepared for depositions, both of us surviving on takeout, and the intoxicating belief that we were destined for something greater. You're going to change the legal world, he'd told me 6 months into our relationship, watching me prepare arguments for a pro bono domestic violence case that the senior partners had dumped on me. And I'm going to help you do it. That support had felt revolutionary. Most of the men I dated had been intimidated by my ambition, suggesting I might want to slow down or find better work-life balance. Douglas was different. He celebrated my victories, strategized through my setbacks, and never once suggested I should want less for myself. When I'd been passed over for promotion the 3rd time at Morrison & Klein despite outperforming my male colleagues in every measurable way, Douglas had been the one to suggest I start my own firm. You're never going to get the recognition you deserve working for people who see you as a threat, he'd said. Build something they can't ignore. The proposal had come during our 3rd anniversary dinner at Daniel, one of those impossibly expensive restaurants that represented everything we were working toward. Douglas had planned it perfectly. intimate table, perfect lighting, my favorite champagne. When he'd dropped to one knee producing a ring that had cost more than my annual salary as an associate, I'd felt like every sacrifice had been worth it. "Amelia Porter," he'd said, his voice shaking with what I'd believed was genuine emotion, "you make me want to be the kind of man who deserves your love. Will you marry me?" The wedding had been everything I'd dreamed of as a girl who'd grown up in a queen's apartment above her mother's hair salon. Central Park ceremony, reception at the Rainbow Room, guest list that included judges and senators and the kind of people who'd once seemed impossibly out of reach. My mother had cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by how far her daughter had come. Douglas's vows had been perfect, passionate promises about building a life together, supporting each other's dreams, creating something meaningful that would outlast us both. "I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word," he'd declared to our assembled guests. "Your success is my success. Your dreams are my dreams." For 5 years it had seemed like he'd meant every word. When I'd finally made the terrifying decision to leave Morrison and Klein and hang out my own shingle, Douglas had been my first investor, contributing $50,000 from his consulting business to help with startup costs. When I'd struggled to find office space, he'd used his political connections to secure a favorable lease in a Madison Avenue building. When I'd needed introductions to potential clients, he'd opened doors that might have remained closed for years. "We're building an empire together," he'd say, during those early years when we'd work until midnight, then collapse into bed exhausted but exhilarated. "The Hendersons are going to be unstoppable." I'd changed my name eagerly, proudly. Amelia Henderson sounded like someone who belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms, someone who could command respect and deliver results. The girl from Queens was still inside me, but she was wrapped in confidence and designer suits and the knowledge that she'd married someone who believed in her completely. Our partnership had extended beyond marriage into genuine professional collaboration. Douglas would research political angles for my cases, helping me understand how legal victories could create broader social change. I would provide legal counsel for his consulting work, ensuring his clients understood regulatory implications of their policy positions. We'd been featured in New York Magazine as the power couple reshaping New York politics and law. Even our disagreements had felt productive. When Douglas had suggested I focus more on corporate law and less on pro bono work, I'd pushed back, and he'd ultimately supported my decision to maintain our victim advocacy program. When I'd questioned some of his more aggressive campaign tactics, he'd listened thoughtfully and adjusted his approach. We'd been equals, or so I'd believed. The red flags had been subtle enough that I'd convinced myself they were signs of growing success rather than growing distance. Douglas working later hours, traveling more frequently, becoming increasingly secretive about client communication. "I have to protect attorney-client privilege," he'd explain when I'd ask about his latest project. "You understand better than anyone." I had understood. Discretion was fundamental to both our professions. Trust was the currency we dealt in, and I'd never questioned whether Douglas was worthy of mine. Standing in this ballroom now, watching him laugh with Celine while wearing my grandmother's necklace around her throat, I realized how completely I'd been played. The diamond necklace currently adorning Celine's throat had survived more betrayals than I had, and until tonight, I'd believed its story of resilience was finished. Looking at those familiar stones catching the plaza's chandelier light, I could almost hear my great-grandmother's voice telling me the story that had shaped 3 generations of Porter women. "This necklace isn't just jewelry, Amelia," my grandmother Eleanor had whispered on her deathbed 3 years ago, pressing the velvet box into my hands with fingers that still bore calluses from decades of seamstress work. "It's proof that Porter women don't just survive we triumph." The necklace had been crafted in 1925 for my great-grandmother Victoria Porter by her husband Samuel as a wedding gift. 15 diamonds arranged in an Art Deco pattern, set in white gold with a distinctive clasp that bore the inscription "Eternal Love," set to V, 1925. It should have been a symbol of marital bliss, but instead it became a testament to female strength when Samuel abandoned Victoria and their infant daughter during the 1929 stock market crash. He left in the middle of the night, my grandmother had told me countless times throughout my childhood, took the car, the bank account, and every piece of furniture he could load into a truck. But he forgot about the necklace, hidden in my mother's sewing basket. Victoria Porter could have sold those diamonds to buy food or pay rent during the Depression. Instead, she'd worn the necklace to every job interview, every business meeting, every moment when she needed to remember her own worth. The seamstress business she'd built from that sewing basket had sustained 3 generations of Porter women through wars, recessions, and personal tragedies. She used to say the diamonds reminded her that pressure creates something beautiful and unbreakable, Eleanor had continued. Every time someone told her she couldn't succeed without a man, she'd touch this necklace and prove them wrong. My grandmother had inherited both the business and the philosophy, expanding Porter alterations into the most respected tailoring shop in Queens. She'd worn the necklace to my mother's graduation from teaching college, to my parents' wedding, to every milestone that proved Porter women could create their own destinies. When my mother had decided to sell the family business and become a stay-at-home wife, Eleanor had been heartbroken but supportive. Some women fight their battles in boardrooms, some in courtrooms, some in their own homes, she'd said. But every Porter woman carries the strength of those who came before. The necklace had sat in Eleanor's jewelry box for 30 years, waiting for the next generation to need its reminder of resilience. When I'd graduated law school, the first Porter woman to earn a professional degree, Eleanor had finally brought it out of storage. "Your great-grandmother Victoria would be so proud," she'd said, fastening the clasp around my neck for my law school graduation photos. She always said the diamonds would find their way to the Porter woman who needed them most. I'd worn it to my first job interview, my first court appearance, my first victory in a case everyone said I couldn't win. The weight of those diamonds against my throat had reminded me that I carried the dreams of women who'd fought for opportunities I now took for granted. When Douglas and I had gotten engaged, I'd shared the necklace's history with him during one of those late-night conversations when couples reveal their deepest treasures. "It's been in my family for nearly a century," I'd explained, showing him the delicate clasp and the faded inscription. "Every Porter woman who's worn it has overcome something that should have destroyed her." Douglas had handled it reverently, understanding immediately that this wasn't just expensive jewelry but a family legacy. "It's beautiful," he'd said, "and it belongs with the most remarkable Porter woman yet." I'd worn it to our wedding, of course, but also to every major milestone in my career. The day I'd passed the bar exam, the day I'd opened Henderson and Associates, the day we'd won our first major case. The necklace had become part of my professional armor, a reminder that Porter women didn't just survive challenges, they transformed them into victories. After my grandmother's funeral, I'd placed the necklace in our home safe, planning to save it for special occasions. "Just until I have a daughter to pass it down to," I'd told Douglas. "It needs to stay in the family." He'd nodded understandingly, even suggesting we increase our insurance coverage to protect such an irreplaceable heirloom. "Your grandmother was right," he'd said. "Some things are worth more than their monetary value." Now, watching Celine's fingers trace those same diamonds that had given my great-grandmother courage to build a business from nothing, I felt the full weight of this betrayal. Douglas hadn't just stolen expensive jewelry, he'd stolen nearly a century of female resilience, 3 generations of Porter women refusing to be broken by the men who'd tried to destroy them. The irony was almost poetic. My great-grandmother's husband had abandoned her, but she'd kept the necklace and built an empire. Now my husband was trying to abandon me, but he'd made the mistake of giving away the very symbol that had taught Porter women how to fight back. As I watched Celine laugh at something Douglas whispered in her ear, my hand unconsciously moved to my throat where the necklace should have been. Tonight those diamonds would return to their rightful place, and Douglas would learn what happened when someone tried to steal from a Porter woman who'd been trained for battle since birth. The decision to give Douglas access to my grandmother's necklace had been made during what I'd believed was the most vulnerable and intimate moment of our marriage. It was 18 months ago, just after Eleanor's funeral, when grief had made me desperate to hold on to anything that connected me to the women who'd shaped me. "I keep reaching for it in the mornings," I'd confessed to Douglas one evening as we sat in our home office, surrounded by estate documents and funeral arrangements. "For 30 years putting on that necklace was how I prepared for battle. Now I'm terrified that if I wear it to court, something will happen to it." Douglas had looked up from his laptop, where he'd been working on what he'd claimed was a crisis communication strategy for a pharmaceutical client. His expression had been so tender, so understanding, that I'd felt guilty for even mentioning my fears when he was already managing his own demanding workload.
Amelia, that necklace survived the Depression and 2 world wars, he'd said gently.
But I understand wanting to protect it. What if we put it in the office safe? That way it's secure but still with us. The suggestion had seemed perfect. Practical, but romantic. Douglas's political consulting firm occupied 2 floors of our Madison Avenue building, just 3 floors below Henderson and Associates. His office safe was state-of-the-art, installed to protect sensitive campaign documents and client files. More importantly, having the necklace there would mean it remained part of our shared professional world. You could visit it whenever you need that connection to your grandmother, he'd continued, closing his laptop to give me his full attention. And when you're ready to wear it again, it'll be right here, safe and waiting. I'd been so grateful for his understanding that I'd kissed him deeply, overwhelmed by having a partner who intuited my emotional needs so perfectly. You always know exactly what I need to hear, I'd whispered. That's what partnerships are for, he'd replied. Your treasures are my treasures. Your legacy is my legacy. The next morning, I'd personally delivered the necklace to his office, watching as he'd placed it carefully in the safe, alongside folders marked with client names I didn't recognize. He'd memorized the combination while I watched, then kissed my forehead as he'd spun the lock. It'll be perfectly safe here, he'd promised. Whenever you want to see it, just call. For months, that arrangement had felt like another example of our successful partnership. When I'd had particularly challenging cases or difficult clients, I'd sometimes walk down to Douglas's office just to hold the necklace for a few minutes. The ritual had become oddly comforting. Douglas would excuse himself from meetings to open the safe, giving me privacy to reconnect with my family's legacy. Feeling better? He'd ask when I'd finished, and I'd always nod, strengthened by those few minutes with the diamonds that had sustained 3 generations of Porter women. The first time I'd noticed something odd was 6 months ago, when I'd arrived at Douglas's office to find him in an intense phone conversation. I need to take this call, he'd mouthed, gesturing toward his phone. Can you come back later? I'd been hurt but understanding. Political consulting often involved sensitive conversations that couldn't be interrupted. But when I'd returned an hour later, the safe had been open, and Douglas had seemed flustered, quickly closing it when I'd entered. Sorry about that, he'd said. Crisis with the senator's campaign, had to access some confidential documents. I'd accepted the explanation without question, though something had felt off about his manner. When I'd asked to see the necklace, he'd open the safe again, but his movements had seemed rushed, almost nervous. The second incident had occurred 3 months later, when I'd surprised Douglas with lunch and found his office door locked during business hours. When he'd finally answered my knocking, claiming he'd been on a conference call, I'd noticed that his desk was covered with documents I didn't recognize, financial statements and legal opinions that looked like they bore my firm's letterhead. New client? I'd asked, curious about the paperwork. Potential client, he'd corrected quickly, gathering the documents. Very sensitive situation, can't discuss details yet. Again, I'd accepted his explanation. Discretion was fundamental to both our professions, and I'd trusted Douglas's judgment implicitly. When I'd mentioned wanting to see the necklace, he'd claimed the safe was having mechanical problems and suggested I wait until the repair technician could look at it. Just a few days, he'd promised. Then everything will be back to normal, but normal had never returned. For the past 3 months, there had always been some reason why I couldn't access the necklace: safe repairs, sensitive documents stored temporarily, important client meetings that couldn't be interrupted. Each excuse had been perfectly reasonable, delivered with the kind of apologetic concern that made me feel guilty for even asking. I'd started to wonder if I was becoming obsessive about the necklace, if grief was making me unreasonably attached to a piece of jewelry. Douglas had been so patient with my requests, so understanding about my emotional needs, that I'd begun to question my own judgment. Now I realized that every gentle deflection, every reasonable excuse, every moment of seeming consideration had been calculated manipulation. Douglas had been so patient with my requestums. Douglas hadn't been protecting my grandmother's necklace, he'd been preparing to steal it, conditioning me to accept his control over my family's most precious legacy. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my business, and my grandmother's memory, had been planning this betrayal for months, possibly years. My return to the ballroom after Detective Small's revelation required the kind of performance I'd perfected in courtrooms, appearing calm while my mind raced through evidence, maintaining composure while calculating my next strategic move. But this time, I wasn't just preparing for cross-examination, I was gathering intelligence on the two people who'd systematically betrayed everything I'd built. From my position near the head table, I had a clear view of Douglas and Celine's interactions throughout the evening. What I'd previously interpreted as professional collaboration now revealed itself as practiced deception. Every touch, every shared glance, every moment of apparent consultation was actually the choreography of two people who'd been planning this betrayal for months. I watched Celine excuse herself from Judge Patterson's table, claiming she needed to powder her nose. Instead of heading toward the ladies' room, she'd made her way to the hotel's business center, the same location where I'd met with Detective Small 30 minutes earlier. Through the glass walls, I could see her accessing a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone conducting routine business. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Detective Small. Can you see the business center from your location?" I typed back discreetly. "Yes. Celine is there now, using a computer. We're monitoring her activity. She's accessing Patterson Industries Foundation accounts. Can you observe without being obvious?" Perfect. I approached the business center casually, stopping to chat with Senator Henderson, who was also conducting business calls. From this vantage point, I could see Celine's computer screen reflected in the glass partition. She was systematically reviewing financial statements, but more troubling, she was preparing what appeared to be transfer authorizations. "Amelia, you look concerned," Senator Henderson observed. "Everything all right with the firm? Just ensuring all our clients' needs are met," I replied, watching Celine print several documents. "You know how it is, as success means constant vigilance." Celine emerged from the business center with a manila folder, her expression satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. She'd just stolen more money from her own family's charitable foundation, using my firm's compromised credentials to authorize the theft. The audacity was breathtaking. Douglas appeared at her side immediately, as if he'd been watching for her signal. They exchanged the folder discreetly, and I watched him slip it into his jacket pocket. Whatever documents she'd prepared were now in his possession, ready for the next phase of their operation. My phone buzzed again. "We have what we need for financial crimes charges. Are you ready to proceed with confrontation?" "Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal, to see how deep this conspiracy went. More importantly, I needed to ensure that when justice was served, it was complete and public." I observed them return to table 12, where Judge Patterson sat alone, checking his phone with the distracted air of someone whose evening had been disrupted by absent companions. The man had no idea his wife had just stolen from his family's legacy while he sat 20 feet away. Douglas and Celine resumed their positions at the table, but their body language had shifted. Where before they'd been carefully maintaining professional distance, now they seemed energized, almost giddy. Celine kept touching the necklace, her fingers tracing the diamonds with possessive satisfaction. Douglas's hand rested on her shoulder with unmistakable intimacy. Judge Patterson looked up as they settled back into their seats, his expression puzzled. I watched him ask what appeared to be a question, probably wondering where they'd been. Celine responded with animated gestures, likely spinning some story about urgent legal consultations or client emergencies. But Arthur Patterson wasn't buying it. Even from across the room, I could see his growing suspicion as he observed the dynamic between his wife and my husband. When Celine leaned close to whisper something in Douglas's ear, the judge's face darkened with recognition. That's when I realized Arthur Patterson might be another ally in this battle. His wife had been stealing from his family's foundation, conducting an affair with my husband, and using my firm as a front for financial fraud. He had as much reason to want justice as I did. I made my decision. Instead of waiting for Detective Small's signal, I would orchestrate this confrontation myself. I would approach Judge Patterson first, explain what I'd discovered, and give him the choice to stand with me when we exposed their crimes publicly. But first, I needed to ensure maximum impact. This wasn't just about recovering stolen money or ending an affair. This was about sending a message that would resonate throughout New York's legal and political communities. Douglas and Celine had used their positions of trust to commit crimes that violated every ethical standard our professions held sacred. I checked my watch. The evening's program would conclude in 20 minutes with closing remarks from the New York Legal Foundation's president. After that, guests would begin departing, and the opportunity for public justice would be lost. 20 minutes to gather my allies, position the witnesses, and prepare for the most important closing argument of my career. 20 minutes to ensure that when Douglas and Celine's betrayal was exposed, it would be witnessed by everyone who mattered in our professional world. I straightened my shoulders and began walking toward table 12, feeling the familiar calm that always preceded victory. My approach to Judge Patterson's table required careful choreography. I couldn't simply arrive and announce that his wife was embezzling from his family's foundation while conducting an affair with my husband. Arthur Patterson was one of the most respected federal judges in New York, a man whose reputation for fairness and integrity had been built over 25 years on the bench. This conversation would determine whether I gained a powerful ally or created a dangerous enemy. Judge Patterson, I said as I reached their table, my voice warm but professional, I hope you're enjoying the evening. I wanted to personally thank you for Patterson Industries' continued confidence in Henderson and Associates. Arthur looked up with the kind of measured attention that had made him legendary in federal court. Mrs. Henderson, congratulations on tonight's recognition. Your firm's pro bono work has been exemplary. His eyes flicked briefly to Douglas and Celine, who had both tensed at my arrival. I was just discussing the environmental litigation with your husband and my wife. How fortuitous, I replied smoothly. Actually, Judge Patterson, I was hoping to speak with you privately about some developments in that case. Would you mind stepping away for a moment? Celine's hand moved protectively to the necklace, her fingers closing around the diamonds as if she could somehow keep them through physical possession. Douglas leaned forward, his politician's instincts recognizing a threat he couldn't quite identify. Amelia, perhaps this could wait until Monday, Douglas suggested, his tone carefully calibrated between husband and professional colleague. Tonight should be about celebration, not business. Some business can't wait, I replied, meeting his eyes directly, particularly when it involves matters of trust and professional integrity. Judge Patterson's expression sharpened. 25 years on the federal bench had taught him to recognize when something significant was about to unfold. Of course, Mrs. Henderson, shall we step into the hotel lobby? As we moved away from the table, I could feel Douglas and Celine's eyes following us. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't be certain how much I'd discovered. That uncertainty would work in my favor. Judge Patterson, I began once we were out of earshot. What I'm about to tell you will be shocking. But I need you to know that federal investigators are already involved, and evidence has been gathered. His judicial composure never wavered, but I saw his attention sharpen to laser focus. I'm listening. Your wife has been embezzling from the Patterson Industries Charitable Foundation. Over the past 6 weeks, she's authorized $200,000 in fraudulent transfers using forged legal opinions that bear my firm's letterhead and my digital signature. The words hit him like physical blows, but Arthur Patterson had spent decades hearing testimony about human betrayal. He processed the information with professional detachment, even as personal pain flickered across his features. You have evidence of this? NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force has been investigating for 3 weeks. Detective Lionel Small briefed me tonight. The transfers were funneled through my husband's consulting firm as payment for non-existent crisis communication services. Judge Patterson was quiet for a long moment, his legal mind undoubtedly analyzing implications and potential consequences. Mrs. Henderson, are you suggesting that your husband and my wife are conducting an affair while systematically defrauding your family's charitable foundation? Yes. And Judge Patterson, there's more. That diamond necklace your wife is wearing? It belonged to my great-grandmother. It's been in my family for nearly a century. His composure finally cracked slightly. She told me it was a family piece, said her grandmother had left it to her. My grandmother left it to me. I entrusted it to my husband for safekeeping 18 months ago. Tonight, he gave it to your wife as some kind of romantic gesture, spinning my family's history as his own. Arthur Patterson's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. What do you need from me? The evening's program concludes in 15 minutes. Detective Small's team is prepared to make arrests, but I believe we have an opportunity for something more significant. These people have used their positions of trust to commit crimes that violate every ethical standard our professions represent. Public exposure, he said, understanding immediately. A roomful of witnesses from New York's legal and political establishment. Your wife will face federal embezzlement charges regardless, but public accountability sends a different message about the consequences of betraying professional trust. Judge Patterson straightened his shoulders, and I saw the man who'd sentenced white-collar criminals to federal prison. What do you propose? I'm scheduled to give closing remarks in 10 minutes. Instead of thanking donors and sponsors, I'm going to expose their crimes publicly. I'll need you to corroborate the financial fraud when I call for witnesses. And the personal betrayals, those speak for themselves. 300 legal professionals will watch Douglas and Celine try to explain why she's wearing my family's heirloom while sitting next to her husband, after they've been caught stealing from his family's charity. Arthur Patterson nodded grimly. Mrs. Henderson, I've spent my career believing that justice delayed is justice denied. Let's ensure that justice is served tonight, publicly and completely. As we walked back toward the ballroom, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded my most important court victories. But this wasn't just another case, this was personal vindication for every betrayal, every lie, every moment when I'd questioned my own judgment. Douglas and Celine were about to learn that stealing from a Porter woman was the worst mistake they'd ever made. Judge Patterson and I returned to the ballroom with the synchronized precision of co-counsel preparing for trial. Our brief conversation had transformed us from acquaintances into allies united by betrayal and a shared commitment to justice. As we approached the head table, I could see Douglas and Celine watching our return, with barely concealed anxiety. I need to coordinate with Detective Small's team, I murmured to Judge Patterson as we separated. Can you keep them at the table for the next 10 minutes? Consider it done, he replied, his judicial authority evident even in whispered conversation. I watched him return to table 12 with the measured stride of someone accustomed to controlling courtrooms. Douglas immediately leaned forward, his politician's instincts recognizing danger even if he couldn't identify its source. Whatever questions he asked, Judge Patterson deflected with the kind of non-committal responses that had served him well during confirmation hearings. Meanwhile, I made my way toward Senator Henderson, who was finishing a conversation with the mayor's wife near the bar. If I was going to expose Douglas and Celine publicly, I needed witnesses who understood the gravity of professional ethics violations. Senator, I said, interrupting politely, could I speak with you briefly about tonight's proceedings? Of course, Amelia, though I hope you're not planning any political campaign announcements. This crowd is far too sophisticated for surprise endorsements. His joke provided the perfect opening. Actually, I am planning an announcement of sorts, one that involves the intersection of legal ethics and political integrity. Senator Henderson's expression grew serious. That sounds ominous. It is. In approximately 8 minutes, I'm going to use my closing remarks to expose serious crimes that have been committed using my firm's reputation as cover. I wanted to give you advance notice because the revelations will impact several prominent political figures. What kind of crimes? Embezzlement from charitable foundations, forgery of legal documents, and violation of federal campaign finance laws. The perpetrators are in this room tonight. Senator Henderson had spent enough years in politics to recognize when a scandal was about to break. Do you have evidence? Federal investigators have been building a case for 3 weeks. Tonight's events will serve as the public revelation before arrests are made. My God, Amelia, are you certain about this course of action? Once you make accusations public, there's no walking them back. Senator, my firm's reputation has been used to facilitate these crimes. My professional integrity has been compromised by people I trusted. There's no walking back from that betrayal. He nodded slowly, understanding the position I was in. What do you need from me? Witness credibility. When I present the evidence, I need respected voices to confirm that what I'm revealing deserves serious legal consequences. You have my support. Next, I approached District Attorney Marianne Small, who was deep in conversation with two Supreme Court clerks about recent precedents in white-collar crime cases. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. Marianne, I interrupted. I need a moment of your time regarding tonight's program. She excused herself from the clerks, recognizing something urgent in my tone. What's happening, Amelia? I'm about to announce that my firm has been used as an unwitting front for federal crimes. The evidence will be presented publicly in the next few minutes, followed by arrests. District Attorney Small's prosecutorial instincts immediately engaged. What crimes? Embezzlement, forgery, campaign finance violations. The defendants include my husband and one of my junior associates. Jesus, Amelia, do you have federal coordination? NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force. Detective Lionel Small is coordinating with federal prosecutors. Any relation? She asked, noting the shared surname. His cousin, actually. Small world, smaller justice system. She appreciated the dark humor despite the circumstances. What's your strategy for public revelation? Use my closing remarks platform to present evidence systematically. Allow the audience to understand the scope of betrayal before announcing law enforcement involvement. Bold choice. But effective if you want to ensure accountability extends beyond criminal prosecution to professional consequences. Exactly. These people use their positions of trust to commit crimes. The legal community needs to see that such betrayals have immediate public consequences. District Attorney Small nodded approvingly. You'll have my full support. This kind of ethics violation undermines public confidence in our entire profession. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Small. Teams positioned. Ready when you are. I typed back. 5 minutes. Targeting public exposure before arrests. Copy that. We'll coordinate with your signal. As I made my way back toward the podium, I caught sight of Douglas and Celine at table 12. They were leaning close together, their conversation intense and obviously urgent. Celine kept touching the necklace, her fingers moving over the diamonds with increasing nervousness. Douglas was scanning the room, his political instincts telling him something was wrong even if he couldn't identify the threat. Judge Patterson sat across from them, maintaining the perfect facade of a husband enjoying an evening out while internally preparing to watch his wife's public destruction. The control he was exhibiting was remarkable. Decades of judicial temperament, allowing him to appear normal while knowing his marriage was about to explode in front of 300 witnesses. The program coordinator approached me, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Henderson, you're scheduled for closing remarks in 2 minutes. Are you ready? I straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar calm that always preceded my most important victories. I've been ready for this closing argument my entire career. The 2 minutes before my closing remarks felt like the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. I used every second to finalize the strategic elements that would ensure maximum impact when I exposed Douglas and Celine's crimes. This wasn't just about personal vindication, it was about demonstrating to New York's legal establishment that professional betrayal would be met with swift public consequences. I signaled discreetly to Detective Small, who was positioned near the hotel's main entrance with 2 additional officers. His slight nod confirmed that arrest teams were ready to move once I'd presented the evidence publicly. The coordination had to be perfect: expose the crimes first, then allow law enforcement to handle the criminal consequences, while the legal community processed the professional implications. Ladies and gentlemen, the program coordinator announced, please welcome Henderson and Associates founding partner Amelia Henderson for our closing remarks. As I approached the podium, I caught one final glimpse of table 12. Douglas was checking his phone obsessively, his politician's instincts finally recognizing that something was fundamentally wrong with the evening's trajectory. Celine sat rigidly beside him, her hand frozen on the necklace as if she could somehow protect herself by maintaining contact with the stolen diamonds. Judge Patterson maintained his judicial composure, but I could see the tension in his shoulders as he prepared to witness his wife's public destruction. The microphone felt familiar in my hands. Countless opening statements, closing arguments and press conferences had prepared me for this moment. But tonight's audience was different. These weren't jurors I needed to convince or reporters I needed to inform. These were my peers, colleagues who understood the sacred trust that bound our profession together. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the plaza's ballroom. "Tonight, we've celebrated Henderson and Associates' recognition as Pro Bono Firm of the Year, an honor that represents everything I believe about the legal profession's responsibility to serve justice." 300 faces looked up at me expectantly, assuming they were about to hear standard remarks about teamwork, dedication, and future goals. Instead, they were about to witness the most dramatic exposure of professional misconduct in New York legal history. But before we conclude this evening's celebration, I must address a matter that strikes at the heart of professional integrity and public trust. The room's energy shifted subtly as my tone indicated something more serious than traditional closing remarks. Conversations quieted, phones were lowered, and attention focused completely on the podium. Earlier tonight, I was approached by Detective Lionel Small of the NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force regarding irregularities involving one of our firm's clients, Patterson Industries, and their charitable foundation. I paused, allowing that information to register. Several guests glanced toward table 12, where Judge Patterson sat with stone-faced dignity while his wife and my husband appeared to be fighting panic. The investigation revealed that $200,000 has been embezzled from the Patterson family's charitable foundation over the past 6 weeks, using forged legal opinions that falsely bore my firm's letterhead and my digital signature. Gasps rippled through the audience as the legal implications became clear. Forgery of attorney documents wasn't just theft. It was a violation of bar ethics that could destroy careers and undermine public confidence in legal opinions. These fraudulent authorizations were used to transfer foundation money to Henderson Political Consulting, my husband's firm, as payment for crisis communication services that were never provided. The room had gone completely silent. Douglas's face had drained of color as he realized his political career was about to end in the most public way possible. Celine appeared to be hyperventilating, her breathing shallow and rapid as she understood that her legal career was over before it had truly begun. "Ladies and gentlemen, professional misconduct of this magnitude demands immediate accountability. But tonight's betrayals extend beyond financial fraud to personal violations that strike at the core of family trust and professional integrity." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photographs Detective Small had provided, surveillance images of Douglas and Celine together at the Reed Street Motel, financial records showing the fraudulent transfers, and documentation of the forged legal opinions. The evidence I'm about to present reveals not only systematic embezzlement, but also the theft of a family heirloom that has been in my family for nearly a century. My voice remained steady, but I could feel the righteous anger that had been building all evening finally finding its outlet. The diamond necklace currently being worn by Associate Celine Patterson belongs to me. It was crafted for my great-grandmother in 1925 and has been passed down through 3 generations of Porter women who understood that some things are more valuable than their monetary worth. Judge Patterson's composure finally cracked slightly as he looked at his wife with a mixture of disgust and profound disappointment. The man who'd spent his career upholding justice was watching his wife's criminal behavior exposed before an audience of their professional peers. "Tonight, you will witness justice served not just through criminal prosecution, but through the immediate professional consequences that must follow when attorneys violate the sacred trust placed in our profession." I looked directly at Douglas and Celine, both of whom seemed frozen in their seats as they realized there was no escape from the public accountability about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present the evidence of crimes committed against my family, my firm, and the integrity of our legal system." The silence in the plaza ballroom was so complete that I could hear the gentle clink of ice settling in water glasses at distant tables. 300 of New York's most influential legal minds sat transfixed, understanding they were about to witness something unprecedented in their professional experience. This wasn't a trial or a hearing, this was real-time justice unfolding at what should have been a celebration. I held the surveillance photographs Detective Small had provided, but I didn't display them immediately. Instead, I let the weight of anticipation build as Douglas and Celine realized their careers, reputations, and freedom were about to be destroyed in the most public forum possible. Before I present the evidence, I continued, my voice carrying the measured cadence of a closing argument, I want you to understand what we're really discussing tonight. This isn't just about financial fraud or professional misconduct. This is about the systematic exploitation of trust by individuals who swore oaths to uphold justice and integrity. Douglas had begun whispering urgently to Celine, his politician's crisis management instincts finally engaging. But there was nowhere to run, no exit strategy that could save them from the public exposure about to unfold. Hotel security had discreetly positioned themselves at all exits, Detective Small's coordination ensuring that when arrests were made, there would be no dramatic escape attempts. Judge Patterson sat with the stoic dignity of someone who'd spent decades watching criminals realize their guilt had been exposed. His wife's betrayal was personal, but his judicial training allowed him to separate emotional devastation from professional duty. When the time came, he would stand as a witness to her crimes rather than attempt to protect her from consequences. The evidence you're about to see was gathered over 3 weeks of federal investigation, I announced, finally raising the photographs. It documents not only financial crimes but also the personal betrayals that enabled those crimes. I displayed the first photograph, a surveillance image of Douglas and Celine entering the Reed Street Motel together at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks ago. The timestamp was clearly visible, as were their faces, caught in an intimate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The audience's collective intake of breath was audible. Several people pulled out phones to record what was happening, understanding they were witnessing legal history. Douglas buried his face in his hands while Celine stared at the photograph with the hollow expression of someone watching their life disintegrate in real time. This photograph was taken while I was in court, arguing a domestic violence case. I said, my voice gaining strength from the righteousness of my position. While I was fighting to protect women from betrayal and abuse, my husband was conducting his own betrayal 3 blocks from our office. The irony wasn't lost on the audience. Henderson and Associates' pro bono work focused specifically on helping women escape abusive relationships, and now they were watching the firm's founder reveal her own victimization by the man who'd supposedly supported that mission. I displayed the second photograph, Celine at the motel again, this time with the distinctive blue jewelry box that had contained my grandmother's necklace clearly visible in Douglas's hand. This image was captured 6 days ago, I explained. My husband is carrying the antique jewelry box that contained my family's most precious heirloom, a diamond necklace that survived the Great Depression, World War II, and 3 generations of Porter women who refused to be broken by the men who tried to destroy them. Celine's hand had moved protectively to her throat, her fingers clutching the necklace as if she could somehow keep it through physical possession. The gesture was unconscious, but damning, everyone in the room could see her defensive reaction to being caught with stolen property. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, setting down the photographs and gripping the podium with both hands, I want you to look at table 12. I want you to see Federal Judge Arthur Patterson, a man who has spent 25 years upholding justice from the bench, sitting next to his wife, who has stolen $200,000 from his family's charitable foundation. All eyes turned toward their table. Judge Patterson met the scrutiny with judicial dignity, while Celine appeared to be on the verge of collapse. Douglas had straightened in his chair, his political training finally overriding panic as he prepared to attempt damage control. I want you to see my husband, Douglas Henderson, who has built his consulting career on messaging about integrity and authentic leadership, while systematically embezzling from the very foundation established to help underprivileged families. Douglas half rose from his chair, his politician's instincts recognizing that silence would be interpreted as guilt. Amelia, this is neither the time nor the place. Sit down, Judge Patterson commanded, his judicial authority cutting through Douglas's attempted interruption. You will have your opportunity to respond when law enforcement questions you. The judge's intervention sent a clear message to everyone watching. This wasn't a marital dispute or professional disagreement. This was a criminal matter that demanded legal resolution, not political spin. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Arthur Patterson for his support, but more importantly, I felt the calm certainty that comes from knowing justice is about to be served. The storm was about to break, and when it was over, the truth would be established beyond any doubt. Now, I said, reaching for the financial documents Detective Small had provided, Let me show you exactly how they did it. The financial documents I held represented months of systematic theft, disguised as legitimate legal work. As I spread them across the podium's surface, each page told the story of how Douglas and Celine had exploited every system of trust that made our legal profession possible. These are copies of the forged legal opinions used to authorize the fraudulent transfers, I announced, holding up the first document. Each bears my firm's letterhead, my digital signature, and language specifically crafted to bypass the Patterson Foundation's standard approval processes. I read directly from the document. In our professional opinion, the urgent nature of the current legal defense requirements justifies immediate distribution of foundation funds to qualified crisis management consultants. My voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I never wrote those words. I never authorized those transfers. My signature was forged to facilitate theft from a charitable foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged families. Douglas finally stood, his politician's training overriding the panic that had kept him frozen. Amelia, these are private matters that should be resolved privately. This public spectacle serves no one's interests. Private matters, I repeated, my voice rising with controlled indignation. Douglas, you stole from a charity. You forged legal documents. You used my professional reputation to commit federal crimes. These stopped being private matters the moment you decided to conduct your criminal enterprise using my firm as a front. The audience was riveted, phones raised to record every word of an exchange that would be dissected in legal circles for years to come. Senator Henderson leaned forward in his seat, his political instincts recognizing a career-ending moment when he witnessed one. District Attorney Small had moved closer to table 12, her prosecutorial experience telling her that arrests were imminent. Celine finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper amplified by the room's perfect acoustics. Mrs. Henderson, there's been a misunderstanding. The financial arrangements were legitimate consulting fees. Consulting fees, I interrupted, holding up the next document. This authorization claims that Henderson Political Consulting provided emergency crisis communication strategies for the Patterson family during a sensitive legal matter, requiring immediate media management. Tell me, Celine, what crisis was your family facing that required emergency communication strategy? Judge Patterson's voice cut through the tension with judicial authority. There was no crisis. There was no media management requirement. There was no legitimate consulting arrangement. His public confirmation of the fraud sent ripples of shock through the audience. Federal judges didn't make public statements lightly, and Arthur Patterson's words carried the weight of absolute credibility. Every attorney in the room understood that when a federal judge stated facts in public, those facts were beyond dispute. Furthermore, Judge Patterson continued, rising from his chair with the dignity that had marked his entire career. The woman sitting beside me is not just my wife. She is Celine Patterson, a licensed attorney who has used her legal training to systematically defraud the charitable foundation my family established to honor my late father's memory. Celine's composure completely shattered. The careful facade she'd maintained throughout the evening collapsed as she realized her own husband was testifying against her in front of 300 witnesses. Arthur, please, you don't understand the full situation. I understand perfectly, he replied, his voice carrying the same tone he used when sentencing white-collar criminals to federal prison. I understand that you've stolen $200,000 from a foundation dedicated to providing legal aid to families who can't afford representation. I understand that you've conducted an extramarital affair while wearing jewelry stolen from the family of the woman whose professional reputation you've destroyed. The judge's words hit like physical blows. Every attorney in the room understood the magnitude of Celine's violations. The theft from a charitable foundation wasn't just criminal, it was a betrayal of every principle the legal profession claimed to uphold. Douglas attempted to regain control of the narrative, stepping away from the table with his hands raised in a gesture of reasoned appeal. Ladies and gentlemen, emotions are running high tonight. Perhaps we should allow cooler heads to prevail and address these allegations through proper legal channels. Proper legal channels? I repeated, my voice carrying the prosecutorial edge I developed during years of courtroom combat. Douglas, Proper legal channels would have been consulting with me before using my firm's credentials to authorize financial transfers. Proper legal channels would have been disclosing your relationship with our client's wife. Proper legal channels would have been not forging my signature on documents that facilitated theft from a charity. I held up the final document, the insurance appraisal of my grandmother's necklace that I'd found in our home safe when I'd retrieved the original photographs Detective Small had requested. And proper legal channels certainly wouldn't have included stealing my family's heirloom to give to your mistress as some kind of romantic gesture. The word mistress hung in the air like an indictment. There was no ambiguity now, no room for alternative interpretations. I had publicly named their relationship for what it was, stripping away any pretense of professional propriety. Celine's hand flew to her throat, fingers closing protectively around the necklace, as if she could somehow make it legally hers through possession alone. But the gesture only drew more attention to the stolen jewelry, providing visual confirmation of my accusation. That necklace, I continued, pointing directly at Celine, belongs to me. It has been in my family for nearly a century, and tonight, it's going home where it belongs. The moment had arrived for complete revelation, and I felt the same clarity that had guided me through every important victory of my career. This wasn't just about reclaiming stolen property or exposing an affair. This was about demonstrating that certain violations of trust would be met with immediate, inescapable consequences. Detective Small, I called toward the hotel entrance, where Lionel Small had been positioned with his arrest team. Would you please join us and present your findings to these witnesses? The detective's appearance sent a ripple of shock through the ballroom. Whatever the audience had expected from tonight's celebration, law enforcement intervention wasn't on the program. Detective Small approached the podium with the measured confidence of someone who'd spent years testifying in federal court. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Small began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to presenting evidence to juries. For the past 3 weeks, the NYPD Financial Crimes Task Force has been investigating systematic embezzlement from the Patterson Industries Charitable Foundation. He displayed his badge for the room to see, establishing his credentials before continuing. Our investigation has documented $200,000 in fraudulent transfers authorized through forged legal opinions allegedly prepared by Henderson and Associates. These transfers were funneled to Henderson Political Consulting as payment for non-existent crisis communication services. Douglas's face had gone ashen as he realized his political career was ending in real time, broadcast to an audience that included every major media contact he'd cultivated over the years. Political consultants lived and died by their reputations, and no amount of spin could recover from federal fraud charges. Furthermore, Detective Small continued, our surveillance has documented an ongoing extramarital affair between Douglas Henderson and Celine Patterson, including the transfer of stolen jewelry as part of their romantic relationship. Celine finally stood, her legal training overriding panic as she attempted damage control. Detective, I must object to the characterization of our professional relationship. Any personal interactions have been completely separate from business matters. Mrs. Patterson, Detective Small interrupted, consulting his notes. You accessed Patterson Industries' financial accounts on 17 separate occasions over the past 6 weeks, each time outside normal business hours and without authorization from the Foundation's board of directors. The specificity of the evidence was devastating. 17 occasions meant this wasn't a moment of weakness or a single poor decision, it was systematic criminal behavior conducted over months of planning. Each unauthorized access was followed within 24 hours by contact with Douglas Henderson, including meetings at the Reed Street Motel where you discussed the transfer authorizations you were preparing. Judge Patterson had remained standing throughout this revelation, his judicial composure intact, but his personal devastation evident to anyone who understood the magnitude of his wife's betrayal. A federal judge's spouse committing financial crimes wasn't just personal humiliation, it was a threat to his entire career and reputation. Detective Small, I interjected, would you please explain to this audience how the forged legal opinions were created? Certainly, Mrs. Patterson used her access to Henderson and Associates' computer systems to copy the formatting and letterhead of legitimate legal opinions. She then created fraudulent documents authorizing the charitable foundation transfers, using Mrs. Henderson's digital signature without permission. Senator Henderson leaned forward in his seat, his political experience recognizing the implications. "Detective, are you saying she had unauthorized access to confidential attorney-client communications?" "That's correct, Senator." Mrs. Patterson's position at Henderson and Associates gave her access to privileged legal documents which she used to create convincing forgeries that bypassed the foundation's approval processes. This revelation sent another wave of shock through the legal community assembled in the ballroom. Attorney-client privilege was sacred in the legal profession, and Celine's violation of that trust represented a breach that went beyond simple fraud. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, reclaiming the microphone, "I want you to understand what you've witnessed tonight. Two licensed attorneys have used their professional positions to commit federal crimes, violate attorney-client privilege, and steal from a charitable foundation dedicated to helping families who can't afford legal representation." I pointed directly at Celine, who was now visibly shaking. "This woman has betrayed every oath she took when she was admitted to the bar. She has violated the trust of clients, colleagues, and family members in pursuit of personal gain." Then I turned to Douglas, who had slumped back into his chair, as if the weight of public exposure had physically defeated him. "And this man has built his political consulting career on messaging about integrity and ethical leadership, while systematically embezzling from charities and forging legal documents." The room was completely silent except for the soft clicks of phones recording every word. This footage would be analyzed, discussed, and referenced in legal ethics courses for decades to come. "But most importantly," I continued, reaching for the clasp of the necklace around Celine's throat, "these people stole from my family. They took the one physical connection I had to 3 generations of Porter women who refused to be broken by betrayal." Celine stepped backward, her hands protective over the necklace, but there was nowhere to go. Hotel security had moved closer, and Detective Small's arrest team was positioned throughout the ballroom. "It's time for this necklace to come home," I said, moving toward her with the calm certainty of someone who knew justice was finally being served. The confrontation that followed was captured by dozens of phones, creating a permanent record of justice being served in real time. Celine's attempt to back away from me was futile. There was nowhere to retreat in the Plaza ballroom, and everyone present understood that the stolen necklace would be returning to its rightful owner. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed through years of courtroom advocacy, "that necklace belongs to my family. You can remove it voluntarily, or Detective Small's team can remove it during your arrest. The choice is yours." Celine's hands trembled as she reached for the clasp, her legal training telling her that cooperation might reduce the severity of her situation even as her emotions screamed against surrendering the symbol of her doomed romance. The diamonds caught the ballroom's chandelier light one final time as she struggled with the antique closure that had been crafted nearly a century ago. "I need help," she whispered, her voice barely audible but amplified by the room's perfect acoustics. Judge Patterson stepped forward, his movements carrying the measured dignity that had defined his judicial career. For a moment the room held its breath, uncertain whether he would help his wife escape or ensure justice was served. "Allow me," he said, his voice carrying finality that brooked no argument. Arthur Patterson's fingers worked the clasp with practiced efficiency. He'd obviously helped his wife with jewelry many times over their marriage, but this time, instead of fastening the necklace, he was removing stolen property from a criminal's throat. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. "This belongs to Mrs. Henderson," he said simply, placing the necklace in my outstretched palm. "Just as justice belongs to those who seek it honestly." The weight of the diamonds in my hand felt like vindication made tangible. 3 generations of Porter women had drawn strength from this necklace, and now it had helped expose the criminals who'd tried to steal not just jewelry but the integrity of everything I'd built. "Douglas," I said, turning to my husband who sat motionless at table 12, "you have 30 seconds to explain to this room why you thought you could forge my signature, steal from a charity, and give away my family's legacy without consequences." He looked up with the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed life had collapsed in a single evening. The politician's confidence that had defined him was completely gone, replaced by the desperate calculation of someone trying to minimize damage that was already irreversible. Amelia, we can work this out privately. The marriage, the business arrangements, everything can be resolved without destroying both our careers. Both our careers, I repeated, my voice rising with incredulous anger. Douglas, you destroyed your own career the moment you decided to commit federal crimes. You forged legal documents. You embezzled from a charity. You violated every ethical standard that makes our professions possible. Detective Small approached Table 12 with 2 additional officers, the arrest protocol unfolding with professional efficiency. Douglas Henderson, you're under arrest for embezzlement, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Miranda rights that followed were recited to an audience of 300 legal professionals, who understood exactly what each charge meant for Douglas's future. Political consulting required public trust, and no amount of crisis management could recover from federal criminal charges. Celine Patterson, Detective Small continued, producing a second set of handcuffs. You're under arrest for embezzlement, forgery, unauthorized access to computer systems, and violation of attorney-client privilege. As the handcuffs clicked into place, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. This was justice being served in its purest form, immediate, public, and witnessed by the very community that had been betrayed by these crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, returning to the microphone as both defendants were led toward the ballroom's exit, what you've witnessed tonight represents everything our legal system stands for. When trust is violated, when oaths are broken, when criminals use their professional positions to prey on the vulnerable, justice must be swift, certain, and public. Senator Henderson stood, beginning an applause that rippled through the ballroom. But this wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement that accountability had been served in a way that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The Patterson Industries Charitable Foundation will be restored to full integrity, I continued. Every stolen dollar will be recovered and returned to its intended purpose, providing legal aid to families who can't afford representation. Judge Patterson remained standing, as his wife was escorted from the ballroom, his judicial dignity intact despite the personal devastation he'd endured. Mrs. Henderson, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, thank you for ensuring that justice was served. My family's foundation will continue its mission stronger than ever. As Douglas and Celine disappeared through the ballroom's exit doors, flanked by law enforcement officers, I fastened my grandmother's necklace around my throat where it belonged. The familiar weight of the diamonds against my skin felt like armor protection forged by generations of women who'd refused to be broken by betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, gripping the podium one final time, tonight we've proven that integrity isn't just an ideal, it's a standard that will be enforced, publicly and completely. The applause that followed was thunderous, sustained, and deeply satisfying. The immediate aftermath of Douglas and Celine's arrest transformed the Plaza Ballroom from a celebration venue into an impromptu legal convention. 300 of New York's most influential attorneys, judges, and political figures had just witnessed the most dramatic exposure of professional misconduct in recent memory, and the conversations that erupted were electric with professional implications. District Attorney Marianne Small approached me first, her prosecutorial instincts already calculating the broader ramifications. Amelia, this was brilliantly executed, but you realize the media storm that's about to follow. Every news outlet in the city will want statements. Let them come, I replied, my hand unconsciously moving to touch the necklace that was finally back where it belonged. Transparency serves justice better than silence. Douglas and Celine chose to commit their crimes publicly. They can face the consequences publicly. Senator Henderson joined our conversation, his political experience evident as he considered the wider implications. The ripple effects will be substantial. Every client Douglas consulted with, every campaign he advised, every political relationship he cultivated, all of it will be scrutinized now. Good, I said, simply. Integrity in politics and law isn't optional. If his criminal behavior taints other operations, then those operations deserve to be examined. Judge Patterson approached our group, his composure remarkable given the personal devastation he'd just endured. 25 years on the federal bench had taught him to separate professional duty from personal trauma, but I could see the cost of that discipline in the lines around his eyes. "Mrs. Henderson," he said formally, "I want to ensure you understand that Patterson Industries will cooperate fully with any ongoing investigations. My family's foundation was violated, but we won't allow that violation to impact the families who depend on our legal aid programs. Judge Patterson, your integrity throughout this evening has been exemplary. The legal community will remember how you chose justice over personal loyalty." He nodded grimly. "Some choices are easier than others, but they're still necessary. My wife's crimes don't diminish the Foundation's mission. If anything, they make that mission more important." Detective Small returned from coordinating the arrests, his professional satisfaction evident. "Mrs. Henderson, we'll need formal statements from you and Judge Patterson within the next 48 hours. The federal prosecutors are already preparing additional charges based on tonight's revelations. Additional charges: campaign finance violations, mail fraud, wire fraud. When we dig deeper into their financial arrangements, we usually find more criminal activity than initial investigations reveal." The scope of Douglas and Celine's criminal enterprise was apparently even broader than what had been exposed tonight. Each revelation validated my decision to handle this confrontation publicly, rather than privately. My phone had been buzzing constantly with texts and calls from reporters, colleagues, and clients who'd heard about the evening's events through social media. The footage of the arrests was already circulating online, with legal professionals analyzing every word of my presentation and the evidence I'd revealed. Amelia came, a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find my former law school roommate, now a partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. I drove over as soon as I saw the videos online. "Are you all right?" The question surprised me. In the adrenaline of exposing crimes and reclaiming justice, I hadn't stopped to consider my own emotional state. "I'm better than all right, Sarah. I'm free." Free? Free from a marriage built on lies, free from wondering why I felt like something was wrong, free from doubting my own instincts when they told me Douglas was hiding something. She nodded understandingly. "The legal community is already rallying behind you. Henderson and Associates' reputation will be stronger after tonight, not weaker." That prediction proved accurate as the evening progressed. Partners from competing firms approached me with expressions of support and admiration for how I'd handled an impossible situation. Rather than viewing my firm as tainted by Douglas's crimes, they saw it as vindicated by my decisive response. "You've set a new standard for professional accountability," observed Supreme Court Clerk Donna Patterson, Judge Patterson's sister-in-law. "Every law firm in the city will be reviewing their internal controls after tonight." By midnight, the Plaza Ballroom had mostly emptied, but a core group of legal professionals remained to discuss the evening's implications. We'd moved from formal celebration to impromptu strategy session, with conversations focusing on how the legal community should respond to such dramatic ethical violations. "The Bar Association will need to act quickly," observed one federal prosecutor. "Celine's law license should be suspended immediately, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings." "Already in motion," confirmed the Bar Association's president, who'd remained throughout the evening's revelations. "Emergency review boards will be convened within the week." As I finally prepared to leave the plaza, I realized that tonight had been more than personal vindication. It had been a demonstration that the legal profession could police itself when necessary. The swift public response to Douglas and Celine's crimes would send a message throughout New York's legal community that such betrayals would be met with immediate consequences. Standing in the hotel lobby, wearing my grandmother's necklace and surrounded by colleagues who'd witnessed justice being served, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal victory. Tonight had proven that Porter women's legacy of resilience wasn't just family history, it was a living force that could still triumph over betrayal. 18 months later, I stood in the same Madison Avenue office where Douglas had once kept my grandmother's necklace in his safe, but everything else had transformed beyond recognition. The space that had housed Henderson Political Consulting was now the expanded headquarters of Porter and Associates. I'd reclaimed my family name along with everything else he'd tried to steal. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed the firm's quarterly report with my new managing partner, former federal prosecutor Lionel Small, Detective Small's cousin, whose reputation for integrity had been exactly what the firm needed to rebuild public trust. Our client list had tripled since the Plaza Hotel revelations, with major corporations and political figures specifically seeking our services because of how we'd handled the crisis. The Patterson Foundation case study is being taught at Columbia Law School, Lionel reported, setting down the latest bar journal that featured our firm on the cover. Professor Martinez says it's become the definitive example of how to respond to professional ethics violations. I smiled, touching the necklace that I now wore every day to court, not as armor but as a reminder that Porter women had always known how to transform betrayal into strength. My great-grandmother would have appreciated being part of a law school curriculum. She always said education was the best revenge against people who underestimated you. The transformation hadn't been easy. The weeks following Douglas and Celine's arrests had brought intense media scrutiny, invasive questions about my marriage, and whispered speculation about whether I'd known about their crimes beforehand. But the legal community's response had been overwhelmingly supportive, with established firms referring clients and the Bar Association publicly commending my handling of the situation. Douglas's political consulting firm had collapsed within days of his arrest. Federal prosecutors had indeed uncovered additional crimes: campaign finance violations dating back 3 years, wire fraud involving multiple clients, and tax evasion that suggested his criminal behavior had been far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. His guilty plea had earned him 4 years in federal prison, with his law license permanently revoked, and his political career utterly destroyed. Celine's fate had been equally decisive. The federal embezzlement charges had been compounded by Bar Association findings that she'd violated attorney-client privilege, forged legal documents, and used her position to commit fraud against multiple clients. Her law license had been revoked within 6 weeks of her arrest, and she'd received a 3-year federal sentence that she was currently serving at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. Judge Arthur Patterson had navigated his wife's crimes with the same judicial dignity he'd displayed that night at the plaza. Rather than retiring in disgrace, he'd used the scandal as an opportunity to become an advocate for stricter ethical oversight in the legal profession. His speeches about professional accountability had become legendary, and his continued leadership of the Patterson Foundation had helped restore its reputation and expand its mission. Speaking of education, Lionel continued, the law school called again about that guest lecture series. They want you to teach a semester-long course on legal ethics and crisis management. I'm considering it, I replied, though the truth was I'd already decided to accept. Teaching the next generation of attorneys about professional integrity felt like a natural extension of the work we were doing at Porter and Associates. My personal life had been slower to rebuild, but that had been intentional. The divorce from Douglas had been finalized within 8 months, with the prenuptial agreement he'd insisted upon working exactly as intended, protecting my family's assets from his criminal liability. The house my grandmother had left me remained mine alone, and I'd converted Douglas's former home office into a library where I could work in peace. Romance wasn't a priority yet, though Arthur Patterson and I had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. We'd both survived public betrayal with our professional integrity intact, and that common ground had created a bond that might evolve into something deeper when we were both ready. The necklace had become more than a family heirloom, become a symbol recognized throughout New York's legal community. Young female attorneys approached me at Bar Association events to hear the story, and I'd begun wearing it to speak at conferences about professional ethics and personal resilience. One more thing, Lionel said, consulting his tablet. The Times wants to do a follow-up story for the 2-year anniversary of the Plaza incident. Justice served, how one night changed legal ethics in New York. They want to interview you about the long-term impact. I considered this, then nodded. Set it up. But I want to focus on the positive changes, the increased oversight, the new ethics training requirements, the message it sent about accountability. This story isn't about my personal vindication anymore. It's about proving that our profession can police itself when necessary. As Lionel left to coordinate the interview, I remained at my desk, touching the diamonds that had sustained 4 generations of Porter women through every challenge life had thrown at them. My great-grandmother had been right. Pressure really did create something beautiful and unbreakable. Tonight, I would go home to the house that had belonged to my family for 3 generations, knowing that every threat to our legacy had been defeated, and every betrayal had ultimately made us stronger. Diamond hard, diamond bright, the Porter women endured, rebuilt, and triumphed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.